Hello, in this video we will discuss about the heart failure. We will understand with the autonomic nervous system and compensatory mechanism, which that will relate to the understanding the shock. So let's begin to understand from here is the heart. This heart contain a right common carotid artery and left common carotid artery, which that is arise from the aortic arch. So this is the right common carotid artery and left common carotid artery. This right and left common carotid artery contain a baroreceptor and chemoreceptor. So this used for the detection of oxygen and carbon dioxide, as well as the baroreceptor for stretching to detect the blood pressure. So this is the aortic arch contain baroreceptor and chemoreceptor also. So this is basically, you can see the blue color is showing that deoxygenated blood carrying through a vena cava, superior and inferior. And on the other hand, this is the descending aorta. And so this is the brain. Brain contain a spinal cord. Spinal cord contain upper part is the brain stem contain medulla oblongata. This is the internal carotid artery, which that arise to sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system is the autonomic nervous system. It is uncontrolled and it is involuntary response. So this can be also the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is the to sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system arise from the aortic arch, the baroreceptor and chemoreceptor. So this is the nervous system which that basically is directly contact with the brain. So here is the brain contain medulla oblongata, which that contain two nuclei. This is the cardioregulatory center and the acceleratory center. So the cardioregulatory center, which that will be balanced through parasympathetic and sympathetic activity, while the cardio-acceleratory center, which that will increase the blood pressure and increase the heartbeat due to the sympathetic activity. So let's begin to understand. Here is the nerves arise from the baroreceptor to sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic. So here is the vagal nerve. This is the parasympathetic nervous system, and this is the sensory nerves. Afferent nerves will move toward the brain, toward the medulla, and it will be glossopharyngeal nerves, cranial nerves, which that will be also target to the cardioregulatory center. So in this way, it will lead to efferent nerve, vagal nerve, which that will be maintain the blood pressure and drop the blood pressure. And in this way, this is basically not work during the heart failure or compensatory mechanism during shock. So before the shock, it will not work for balance. On the other hand, here is the sympathetic fiber arise from the acceleratory center, which that will target to the adrenal gland as well as kidney to nephron. So when drop in blood pressure, so it will release adrenaline and noradrenaline, which that will increase the blood pressure. And also adrenal gland produce this adrenaline and noradrenaline, that is and also the renin will produce. This renin will produce from the kidney through a stimulation from the sympathetic fiber. Renin will convert the angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. And angiotensin converting enzyme are present in the lungs, which there will be convert the angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. And this is the cardiac hypertrophy with long term when the shock, before the shock. And in this way, after the cardiac hypertrophy can be occur. And angiotensin 2 also stimulate the thirst, which that will lead to increase the blood volume after the polydipsia. So this is the vasoconstriction and cardiovascular system, which that will lead to accelerate, and in this way the angiotensin 2. So the vasoconstriction will be occur. On the other hand, here is the nephron, which that is the part of the kidney, that is the urinary unit, nephron. And here is the angiotensin 2 will stimulate the adrenal cortex for releasing of the aldosterone. Why? Because the blood pressure is not too much, and decrease the blood pressure will lead to increase the aldosterone, will target to the aquaporin channel and sodium reabsorption and water reabsorption into the blood circulatory system. Salt and water retention will lead to increase the blood volume, and the blood volume will lead to increase the blood pressure. So the both things, basically the blood volume when increased and increase the blood pressure. This is known as the Renin-Angiotensin aldosterone system. So here is the myocardial ischemia mean the plaque will be developed in the coronary artery. When the plaque will develop into the coronary artery, in this way the blood perfusion with the cardiac cells will be decreased. When the cardiac cell will be decreased, decrease the oxygen and nutrients. In this way, the physiological changes will be occur. While on the other hand, here is, you can understand, this is the basically the decreased blood pressure will lead to increase the blood pressure. Normally, we will discuss first. So when decrease the blood pressure, the naturally, so the baroreceptor and chemoreceptor will detect. For example, chemoreceptor will detect the carbon dioxide, and increase the blood pressure will lead to also hyperventilation. And in this way, the cardio inhibitory center will decrease, and in this way, the baroreceptor and the sinoatrial node, which that will be firing through baroreceptor, and the cardio inhibitory center will be decreased, and the noradrenaline and adrenaline will be produced from chemoreceptor, and in this way the increase of the noradrenaline and adrenaline will lead to sympathetic activity increase, and cardio acceleratory center will be increase, will lead to increase the heart rate, and vasoconstriction will lead to increased blood pressure. After this increased blood pressure, we shut down this chemoreceptor and baroreceptor detection, and again the noradrenaline and adrenaline decrease will lead to normal the blood pressure. So this is the positive and negative feedback mechanism. While here is that due to the hypoxia, and chemoreceptor will detect the hypoxia, mean the decrease of the oxygen will lead to hyperventilation, breathing will increase, and cardiac heart rate will be increased and lead to shock. The shock is basically different type, but here we will understand with the plaque development in the coronary artery. And there are a lot of things. And in this way, here is the blood pressure will be detection due to the stretching baroreceptor, stretching of the vessel of the carotid artery. And in this way, the firing of the baroreceptor will lead to cardiac acceleratory center, increase the sympathetic activity. After the sympathetic activity, the cardiac output will be increased. So the cardiac output will be increased. Basically, the cardiac output is basically equal to heart rate into stroke volume. So in this way, the cardiac output rate will be increased due to in this way the stroke volume and heart rate basically collectively increase. So average heart rate is 70 minute per second. So here you should ignore this equation because it is not correct. So this heart rate will be increased. On the other hand, important thing is that here is the cardiac output will be lead to renal blood flow increase, and this increase the renal blood flow, the salt and water retention will be increased due to the aldosterone secretion from the adrenal cortex, and the vascular volume will be increased, will lead to this vascular volume when increase. So a salt and water retention will lead to vascular volume increase. After this increase of the vascular volume, the venous return preload will be, and in this way you can understand as well. But on the case of the myocardial ischemia, ischemia means the less oxygen and decrease the blood flow into the heart tissue, and the heart tissue will not consume the oxygen too much. So let's begin to understand the ischemia. Ischemia means the oxygen will decrease, and on the other hand, when oxygen will be decreased due to the plaque development, it is known as the atherosclerosis. And in this way, the basically is the cell content channel, the cardiac cell content channel, which that is ATP dependent channel. We require against the osmotic gradients, the potassium will move inside, and the sodium will move outside. Will dysfunction due to the less ATP will lead to edema. So the low blood flow and pressure to less contraction, and in this way the decreasing of ATP, so the sodium will not move outside and potassium will not move inside. In this way the cell edema will be occur due to the increase of the sodium will lead to increase absorb more water, will lead to cellular edema. So in this way the cardiac output will be decreased. Why? Because the contraction, and in this way the sympathetic nervous system will increase due to the baroreceptor, will lead to increased heart output and decreased blood flow. Because the heart output basically when increase, so the input when decrease lead to blood pressure decrease, and the cardiac hypertrophy and cardiomyopathy will be occur. So in this way here is the angiotensin 2 and enzyme. Angiotensin 2 will lead to cardiac hypertrophy and cardiomyopathy. On the other hand, here is the decreased blood flow into the cardiomyocytes will lead to inadequate perfusion. So the inadequate perfusion of the oxygen lead to increase the carbon dioxide while the decrease of the oxygen, and in this way the carbon dioxide when increased will combine with the water in the presence of carbonic anhydrase enzyme will lead to hydrogen bicarbonate dissociation and hydrogen bicarbonate dissociation. So the cell hypoxia will be occur, and cell hypoxia mean the decrease of the oxygen, and in this way here is the carbon dioxide and water which that combine together to produce proton and hydrogen bicarbonate. Proton increase lead to blood acidosis. In this way the pH of the blood will be increased. When increase the pH of the blood will lead to dysfunction of the many physiological processes. So here is the energy decline due to the cell hypoxia. Why? Because the oxygen is not present too much. In this way the energy decline due to the anaerobic metabolism. Glycolysis can be happen, but the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain will be decreased, and lactic acid accumulation due to the fermentation in this way the fall pH level also due to the lactic acid accumulation. And in this way here is the normally the water will combine with the carbon dioxide will be produce carbonic acid, and carbonic acid easily dissociate into the carbon dioxide and water, and again the exhalation of the carbon dioxide and inhalation of the oxygen will be normally. But here is the metabolic acidosis will lead to vasoconstriction also, and endothelial dysfunction and failure of precapillary sphincter, and peripheral pooling of blood will be increased. So that on the other hand, the metabolic acidosis will lead to cell membrane dysfunction and failure of sodium pump. In this way, the sodium will not move out, and the retention of the sodium into the cell will lead to cellular edema. And this cellular edema will intracellular lysosomes release digestive enzyme for the efflux of potassium and influx of sodium and water. So in this way, the efflux of the potassium should be not, but in this case, the efflux of potassium will lead to increase the influx of sodium and water due to the decrease or decline of the ATP, because ATP dependent channel require the potassium move inside for the balance, because the potassium is the intracellular cation, and sodium is the extracellular. So in this way, the dysfunction will lead to cellular edema, and this cellular edema will toxic substance enter and circulation, and in this way the capillary endothelial damage and destruction and dysfunction and cell death is known as necrosis, because the cell injury of the cell is known as cell injury, death is known as necrosis, while the apoptosis will be inhibited. While here is the understanding the shock simply, here I am understanding with the summary. So the cellular response to decrease the systemic oxygen delivery and ATP will be decline will lead to sodium potassium pump dysfunction, because the ATP dependent sodium potassium pump dysfunction, because ATP decline, and the cellular edema will be occur. In this way, the water retention more into the cell and cell lysis can be happen, and due to accumulation of sodium inside the cell, and hydrolysis of cellular membrane and cellular death, necrosis will be occur, and the mitochondrial activity and severely depressed and lysis, because the mitochondria is not working, because the ATP is not produced and oxygen is not. So in this way, the oxygen when not are present too much, in this way the and lysosomal rupture may occur of the mitochondria, and in this way the systemic metabolic lactic acidosis that overcomes that body's compensatory mechanism, which that will lead to shock. So this is the understanding about the shock related to the heart failure, that is the compensatory mechanism. In this way, the baroreceptor involved, and the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, for example autonomic nervous system, involved for the heart failure and lead to death. So thanks for watching. Please make sure to subscribe.